Question 1. What factors determine the appropriate level of justification required by a Durham police officer when considering a stop and search of an individual based on an anonymous tip? Option A. The specificity and corroboration of the information provided in the tip, combined with the officer's direct observations and knowledge of the local area. Option B. The perceived demeanor of the individual and the general reputation of the area where the tip was received. Option C. The officer's personal belief that the individual might be involved in criminal activity, regardless of concrete evidence. Option D. The urgency of the situation and the potential for the individual to evade capture if not immediately apprehended. Correct answer is A. The specificity and corroboration of the information provided in the tip, combined with the officer's direct observations and knowledge of the local area. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights and maintain the integrity of an investigation. The Durham Police Department operates under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 PACE and associated codes of practice, which govern powers of stop and search, arrest, and detention. Misjudging the appropriate approach can lead to unlawful actions, compromised evidence, and damage to public trust. The best approach involves a thorough risk assessment that considers the totality of the circumstances, including the reliability of the information, the potential for immediate harm or destruction of evidence, and the legal grounds for any proposed action. This aligns with the principles of PACE, which emphasizes that powers should be exercised reasonably and proportionately. Specifically, before initiating a stop and search, an officer must have reasonable grounds for suspecting that they will find stolen goods, prohibited articles, or evidence of certain offenses. If an arrest is contemplated, reasonable grounds for suspecting the person has committed or is attempting to commit an offense are required, along with necessity considerations outlined in PACE Code G. This methodical, legally grounded assessment ensures that police actions are justified and defensible. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on a vague tip without independent corroboration or further investigation. This fails to meet the reasonable grounds for suspicion threshold required by PACE for a stop and search, and could lead to an unlawful detention or search. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with an arrest based on a hunch or a desire to get ahead of potential criminal activity without concrete evidence of an offense. This disregards the necessity test for arrest and the presumption of innocence. Finally, an approach that prioritizes obtaining information at all costs, potentially through coercive or unlawful means, directly violates the ethical standards and legal frameworks governing police conduct in Durham, undermining the rule of law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the objective, gathering all available information, assessing its reliability, and then evaluating potential courses of action against legal requirements, such as PACE, and ethical principles. This includes considering the proportionality of any action, the potential impact on individuals, and the likelihood of achieving the desired outcome lawfully. Continuous evaluation and seeking advice, when uncertain, are crucial components of sound professional judgment. Question 2. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pattern of access to a database containing sensitive personal information related to ongoing investigations within the Durham Regional Police Service. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action to manage this potential risk? Option A. Isolate the affected data. Conduct a detailed risk assessment to determine the nature and scope of the potential breach, and consult with the department's privacy officer or legal counsel to determine next steps in accordance with Ontario's privacy legislation. Option B. Immediately disseminate the alert and the access data to all investigative units to ensure awareness and prompt action on any related cases. Option C. Ignore the alert as it is likely a system anomaly and not a genuine security concern, to avoid unnecessary disruption. Option D. Proceed with using the access data for investigative purposes, assuming it is relevant to current cases, without further verification or assessment of privacy implications. The correct answer is A. Isolate the affected data, conduct a detailed risk assessment to determine the nature and scope of the potential breach, and consult with the department's privacy officer or legal counsel to determine next steps in accordance with Ontario's privacy legislation. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential breach of data privacy regulations, specifically concerning the handling of sensitive information by law enforcement in Ontario, Canada. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for effective policing and public safety with the fundamental rights of individuals to privacy, as enshrined in Ontario's Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, FIPA, and the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, MFIPA, if applicable to the specific police department structure. The rapid identification and potential dissemination of personal information, even if for investigative purposes, necessitates a rigorous risk assessment to prevent unauthorized access, use, or disclosure. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes data minimization, purpose limitation, and secure handling protocols. This means immediately isolating the identified data, assessing its sensitivity and the nature of the potential breach, and then determining the minimal necessary steps to mitigate the risk, while adhering strictly to FIPA/MFIPA requirements for data protection and notification. This approach ensures that any action taken is proportionate, lawful, and respects individual privacy rights. It involves consulting with the department's privacy officer or legal counsel to ensure compliance with all relevant legislative obligations regarding data breaches and the protection of personal information. Failing to conduct a thorough risk assessment and instead immediately disseminating the information to all officers without a clear, lawful purpose and without considering the privacy implications constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action risks violating FIPA/MFIPA by potentially disclosing personal information beyond what is necessary for the investigation and without proper authorization. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the alert, which is a direct contravention of the duty to protect personal information and could lead to severe consequences if a breach is confirmed and not addressed. Furthermore, assuming the data is not sensitive and proceeding with its use without verification bypasses critical privacy safeguards mandated by law. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying the potential issue, assessing its severity and scope, consulting relevant policies and legislation, in this case, FIPA/MFIPA, seeking expert advice, privacy officer, legal counsel, and then implementing a proportionate and lawful response. This process emphasizes due diligence, accountability, and the protection of individual rights. Question 3. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Durham Police Department officer has apprehended a suspect in connection with a recent burglary. The suspect is currently in custody at the police station and is being questioned in an interview room. The officer believes the suspect has crucial information about the stolen property. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take to ensure any statements made by the suspect are admissible in court and that constitutional rights are upheld under North Carolina law? Option A. Inform the suspect of their Miranda rights, including the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney, and obtain a voluntary and knowing waiver of these rights before proceeding with any questioning. Option B. Ask the suspect if they want to talk to a lawyer, but proceed with questioning if they express a willingness to speak without one, without explicitly stating all their Miranda rights. Option C. Tell the suspect that cooperating now will likely result in a lighter sentence, and then proceed with questioning to encourage them to provide information. Option D. Begin questioning the suspect immediately to gather as much information as possible, and then inform them of their Miranda rights later in the process if the questioning becomes more intense. The correct answer is A. Inform the suspect of their Miranda rights, including the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney, and obtain a voluntary and knowing waiver of these rights before proceeding with any questioning. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the Durham Police Department officer to balance the immediate need for information gathering with the legal rights of the individual being questioned. The officer must act within the strict confines of North Carolina law regarding custodial interrogations and the admissibility of evidence obtained. Failure to adhere to these legal standards can result in the suppression of crucial evidence, jeopardizing the investigation and potentially allowing a guilty party to evade justice. The pressure to solve a crime quickly can lead to shortcuts, but these shortcuts can have severe legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves conducting a lawful custodial interrogation. This means that before questioning an individual who is in custody and is not free to leave, the officer must inform them of their Miranda rights. These rights, derived from the Fifth and Sixth Amendments of the U.S. Constitution and codified in North Carolina law, include the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, and the understanding that anything said can be used against them in court. The individual must then voluntarily and knowingly waive these rights before any questioning begins. This approach is correct because it upholds constitutional protections, ensures the admissibility of any statements made, and maintains the integrity of the investigation and the justice system. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with questioning without informing the individual of their Miranda rights, assuming they will cooperate or that the information is not critical enough to warrant the formal process. This is a direct violation of constitutional rights and North Carolina case law. Statements obtained in violation of Miranda are generally inadmissible in court, severely hindering the prosecution's case. Another incorrect approach is to subtly coerce or trick the individual into waiving their rights, perhaps by downplaying the seriousness of the situation or implying that cooperation will lead to leniency without a formal waiver. This undermines the voluntary nature of the waiver and can lead to the suppression of evidence. The waiver must be intelligent and voluntary, free from coercion or deception. A third incorrect approach is to delay providing the Miranda warning until after significant questioning has already occurred, especially if the individual is in custody. This can create a situation where statements made prior to the warning are deemed involuntary or obtained in violation of rights. Even if a warning is eventually given, the warning must precede custodial interrogation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves a thorough understanding of the relevant laws and constitutional protections, such as Miranda v. Arizona and its application in North Carolina. Before initiating any custodial interrogation, officers should mentally or physically, if policy dictates, check off the necessary steps. Is the individual in custody? If so, are they aware they are not free to leave? If both are true, then the Miranda warning must be given, and a knowing, voluntary waiver obtained before any questioning that could elicit an incriminating response. If there is any doubt about custody, officers should err on the side of caution and provide the warning. This proactive approach ensures that evidence is legally obtained and that the rights of individuals are respected, ultimately strengthening the investigative process. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate that intelligence suggests a potential organized crime group is operating within the Durham area, with preliminary information pointing towards drug trafficking. What is the most appropriate initial step for the Durham Police Department to take in assessing the risk and planning subsequent intelligence gathering? Option A. Halt all intelligence gathering activities until a formal, multi-agency task force can be established to ensure all potential risks are mitigated by a broad consensus. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive, documented risk assessment to identify potential intelligence gaps, evaluate the seriousness of the suspected offense, and determine the proportionality and legality of various intelligence gathering methods, prioritizing less intrusive options first. Option C. Rely on informal intelligence from community informants and patrol officers to build a case, without formal documentation or further verification, before considering any official action. Option D. Immediately initiate covert surveillance operations on all individuals and locations identified in the preliminary information to gather definitive evidence of drug trafficking. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive, documented risk assessment to identify potential intelligence gaps, evaluate the seriousness of the suspected offense, and determine the proportionality and legality of various intelligence gathering methods, prioritizing less intrusive options first. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and ensure due process. The Durham Police Department operates under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 PACE and associated codes of practice, which govern how evidence can be obtained and handled. Misjudging the appropriate level of risk assessment or the methods used to gather information can lead to the suppression of evidence, disciplinary action, and a breach of public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic and documented risk assessment that prioritizes lawful and proportionate methods for gathering intelligence. This approach begins with clearly defining the intelligence gap and the specific objectives of the investigation. It then involves identifying potential risks associated with different intelligence gathering methods, including legal, ethical, and operational risks. The chosen method must be proportionate to the seriousness of the suspected offense and authorized by appropriate legislation or policy. For example, if the intelligence relates to a serious organized crime matter, a more intrusive method might be justified after a thorough assessment, whereas for a minor offense, less intrusive methods would be mandated. This aligns with the principles of necessity and proportionality enshrined in PACE and the Human Rights Act 1998, ensuring that police actions are justified and do not infringe unnecessarily on individual rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately deploying intrusive surveillance techniques without a prior, documented risk assessment. This bypasses the crucial step of evaluating the necessity and proportionality of the action, potentially violating individuals' rights to privacy under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, incorporated into UK law by the Human Rights Act 1998, and contravening PACE provisions regarding the authorization of intrusive surveillance. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal information gathering without corroboration or a clear intelligence plan. While informal sources can be valuable, acting upon them without a structured risk assessment and verification process can lead to inaccurate intelligence, wasted resources, and potentially unfounded actions against individuals, undermining the integrity of the investigation and the department's reputation. A further incorrect approach is to delay intelligence gathering due to an overly cautious or bureaucratic risk assessment process that paralyzes operational effectiveness. While thoroughness is essential, an assessment that is so protracted that it allows a criminal enterprise to dissipate or evidence to be destroyed fails to meet the operational demands of policing and can have serious consequences for public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making framework that begins with defining the intelligence requirement. This is followed by a comprehensive risk assessment, considering legal constraints PACE, REPA 2000, ethical considerations, integrity, fairness, and operational feasibility. The assessment should identify and evaluate potential intelligence gathering methods, weighing their effectiveness against the associated risks and legal authorizations required. The chosen method must be the least intrusive necessary to achieve the objective. Documentation of the entire process is critical for accountability and review. Question 5. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a Durham Police Department officer believes a specific individual may possess information relevant to an ongoing fraud investigation. The officer is considering how to obtain this information. Which of the following actions best aligns with Durham's regulatory framework and professional policing standards for obtaining such information? Option A. Share the officer's suspicions with other law enforcement agencies and community informants to gather intelligence on the individual's activities without a formal investigative request. Option B. Begin monitoring the individual's social media activity and publicly available online information without any formal request or specific suspicion, hoping to uncover relevant details. Option C. Access the individual's financial records and personal correspondence through informal channels or by leveraging existing departmental access without a specific warrant or documented justification. Option D. Formally request specific digital communication records pertaining to the individual, supported by a documented articulable suspicion linking the individual to the fraud, and demonstrating the relevance of the requested data to the investigation, seeking appropriate judicial or supervisory authorization. The correct answer is D. Formally request specific digital communication records pertaining to the individual, supported by a documented articulable suspicion linking the individual to the fraud, and demonstrating the relevance of the requested data to the investigation, seeking appropriate judicial or supervisory authorization. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical and legal obligations to protect individual privacy and maintain the integrity of an investigation. The Durham Police Department operates under strict guidelines regarding data handling and surveillance, necessitating a careful, evidence-based approach rather than a broad, speculative one. Misjudging the scope or justification for data access can lead to legal repercussions, damage public trust, and compromise the investigation itself. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a formal request for specific data, supported by a clear articulable suspicion that the individual is involved in criminal activity and that the requested data is relevant to that activity. This approach aligns with the principles of necessity and proportionality, ensuring that data collection is targeted and justified. In Durham, this would typically involve obtaining judicial authorization or following established internal protocols that require supervisory approval and a documented rationale for surveillance or data access, adhering to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 (PACE) and relevant data protection legislation. This method ensures accountability and minimizes the risk of overreach. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating broad, unfettered access to an individual's digital communications without specific suspicion or authorization is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This violates privacy rights and data protection laws, such as the Data Protection Act 2018, which mandates lawful and fair processing of personal data. Such an approach lacks the necessary justification and could be deemed unlawful surveillance. Accessing data based on a vague hunch or a desire to see what might turn up is professionally unacceptable. This approach is speculative and lacks the required reasonable grounds for suspicion, which is a cornerstone of lawful investigative powers. It risks collecting irrelevant information, misinterpreting data, and violating the principles of necessity and proportionality. Sharing the individual's personal information with other departments or external agencies without a clear legal basis or established interagency agreement is also a failure. This constitutes an unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information, potentially breaching data protection regulations and confidentiality agreements. Such actions can lead to severe consequences for both the individuals involved and the department. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying the investigative objective. This should be followed by a thorough assessment of available intelligence to establish reasonable grounds for suspicion. Any proposed data access or surveillance must then be evaluated against legal requirements, such as PACE and data protection laws, to ensure proportionality and necessity. Documentation of the rationale and authorization process is crucial for accountability and transparency. If doubt exists regarding the legality or ethicality of an approach, seeking guidance from legal counsel or senior officers is paramount. Question 6. Risk assessment procedures indicate that the Durham Police Department has received credible, albeit uncorroborated, intelligence suggesting a potential public safety threat. What is the most appropriate initial step for the department to take in assessing and responding to this information? Option A. Defer any investigative action until the intelligence is fully corroborated by multiple independent sources, regardless of the potential for imminent harm. Option B. Immediately deploy covert surveillance technology to gather comprehensive information on all individuals potentially connected to the intelligence. Option C. Conduct a thorough, documented assessment of the threat's nature, severity, and immediacy, and identify the specific intelligence required, while exploring the least intrusive lawful methods for gathering that intelligence. Option D. Initiate a public awareness campaign to solicit information from the community, without specifying the nature of the potential threat. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough, documented assessment of the threat's nature, severity, and immediacy, and identify the specific intelligence required, while exploring the least intrusive lawful methods for gathering that intelligence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to prevent potential harm with the legal and ethical obligations to respect individual privacy and due process. The Durham Police Department operates under strict guidelines regarding information gathering and the use of surveillance technology, necessitating a careful assessment of proportionality and necessity. Misjudging the risk or the appropriate response could lead to legal repercussions, damage to public trust, and a failure to effectively protect the community. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic and documented risk assessment that prioritizes gathering intelligence through lawful and proportionate means. This approach begins with a clear articulation of the suspected threat, the potential harm, and the specific information required to mitigate that harm. It then involves evaluating various intelligence gathering methods, considering their effectiveness, intrusiveness, and legal basis, prioritizing methods that are least intrusive while still being effective, such as open-source intelligence or consensual inquiries, before escalating to more invasive techniques like covert surveillance, is crucial. This aligns with the principles of necessity and proportionality, ensuring that any intrusion into privacy is justified by the severity of the suspected threat and the lack of less intrusive alternatives. This methodical process is supported by departmental policies and the legal framework governing police investigations in Durham, which mandate that all investigative actions be reasonable and necessary. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately deploy advanced surveillance technology based on a vague suspicion, without a thorough assessment of the threat's severity or exploring less intrusive alternatives. This fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality, potentially violating privacy rights and exceeding the scope of lawful investigation. It also bypasses the requirement for documented justification, making the action legally vulnerable. Another incorrect approach is to delay action indefinitely due to an overly cautious interpretation of privacy laws, even when there is credible information suggesting a significant and imminent threat to public safety. This inaction could lead to preventable harm, demonstrating a failure to balance competing public interests and potentially violating the duty of care owed to the community. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on anecdotal information or unsubstantiated rumors to justify intrusive investigative measures. This lacks the necessary evidential basis required for such actions and can lead to misallocation of resources and unwarranted suspicion on individuals, undermining public trust and potentially leading to legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to risk assessment. This involves 1. Clearly defining the suspected threat and potential harm, including its immediacy and severity. 2. Identifying the specific intelligence needed to address the threat. 3. Brainstorming and evaluating all available intelligence gathering methods, from least to most intrusive. 4. Assessing the legality, proportionality, and necessity of each method in relation to the identified threat. 5. Documenting the entire process, including the rationale for selecting specific methods and rejecting others. 6. Seeking appropriate authorization for any intrusive measures. This structured decision-making process ensures that actions are both effective in protecting the public and compliant with legal and ethical standards. Question 7. Strategic planning requires the Durham Police Department to allocate its limited resources effectively. Considering the principles of risk assessment and public safety, which of the following approaches best guides the department in determining where to deploy its officers and investigative teams? Option A. Distribute resources equally across all geographical areas within Durham to ensure fairness, regardless of reported incidents or intelligence. Option B. Allocate resources primarily based on the issues that have received the most significant media coverage in the past month to ensure public visibility and responsiveness. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive, data-driven risk assessment that evaluates the likelihood and potential impact of various threats to public safety within the Durham jurisdiction, prioritizing those with the highest risk scores. Option D. Maintain current resource allocation levels based on historical crime patterns from the last 5 years, assuming these trends will continue. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive, data-driven risk assessment that evaluates the likelihood and potential impact of various threats to public safety within the Durham jurisdiction, prioritizing those with the highest risk scores. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement agencies, balancing resource allocation with the need to address emerging threats. The Durham Police Department, like any public service organization, operates under strict budgetary constraints and must make strategic decisions about where to deploy its limited resources. This requires a robust risk assessment process that is both data-driven and ethically sound, ensuring that public safety is maximized within legal and financial parameters. The challenge lies in objectively evaluating potential threats, considering their likelihood and impact, and aligning these assessments with departmental priorities and public expectations, all while adhering to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 (PACE) and relevant Home Office guidelines on policing priorities. The most effective approach involves a comprehensive, evidence-based risk assessment that prioritizes threats based on their potential impact on public safety and the likelihood of their occurrence within the Durham jurisdiction. This methodology ensures that resources are directed towards the most critical areas, aligning with the strategic objectives of the Durham Police Department and the broader mandate of maintaining law and order. This approach is grounded in principles of efficient resource management and proactive policing, aiming to prevent harm and respond effectively to incidents. It also aligns with the ethical obligation to serve the public interest by making informed, objective decisions about resource allocation. An approach that focuses solely on public perception or media attention, without a rigorous assessment of actual risk, is professionally unsound. This can lead to misallocation of resources, diverting attention from genuine threats and potentially neglecting vulnerable communities. Such a reactive strategy fails to meet the proactive demands of modern policing and can undermine public trust if perceived as being driven by sensationalism rather than genuine need. It also risks violating the principles of fairness and impartiality by prioritizing visible issues over less publicized, but potentially more damaging ones. Another flawed approach is to allocate resources based on historical patterns without considering current intelligence or emerging trends. While historical data can be informative, it may not accurately reflect the contemporary risk landscape. Failing to adapt to new threats or changes in criminal activity can leave the Durham Police Department unprepared for future challenges, compromising its ability to protect the public effectively. This static approach ignores the dynamic nature of crime and security. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the personal opinions of senior officers without a systematic and data-driven assessment is also problematic. Such methods lack objectivity and can introduce bias into the decision-making process. This can lead to inequitable resource distribution and may not address the most pressing safety concerns within the Durham community. It fails to uphold the professional standards of evidence-based policing and accountability. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with defining clear objectives for resource allocation. This involves gathering and analyzing relevant data, including crime statistics, intelligence reports, and community feedback. A multi-criteria risk assessment framework should then be applied to evaluate potential threats, considering factors such as likelihood, impact, and vulnerability. Finally, decisions should be documented, communicated, and regularly reviewed to ensure ongoing effectiveness and adaptability. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that upon arriving at a disturbance call in Oshawa, Ontario, a Durham Regional Police Service officer observes a disoriented individual near a broken window and hears shouting from inside a residence. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer? Option A. Approach the disoriented individual directly and demand immediate answers about what is happening inside the residence. Option B. Secure the perimeter of the residence, assess the immediate safety of the individual and the surroundings, and then cautiously approach the individual to gather information while observing their behavior for any signs of threat. Option C. Immediately enter the residence to investigate the source of the shouting, assuming a crime is in progress and exigent circumstances exist. Option D. Focus solely on the broken window, attempting to gather forensic evidence before interacting with anyone present. The correct answer is B. Secure the perimeter of the residence, assess the immediate safety of the individual and the surroundings, and then cautiously approach the individual to gather information while observing their behavior for any signs of threat. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the Durham Police Department officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect an individual's rights and ensure the integrity of evidence. The officer must make a rapid assessment of the situation, considering the potential risks to public safety, the victim, and the suspect, while also adhering to the strict procedural requirements of the Durham Regional Police Services policies and the Police Services Act of Ontario. The pressure of a dynamic situation can lead to hasty decisions that compromise due process or investigative effectiveness. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the scene and rendering aid to any injured parties, which is the primary duty of a police officer. Following this, the officer should identify and preserve potential evidence without disturbing it unnecessarily. The next critical step is to cautiously approach the individual, making clear verbal commands, and observing their behavior for any immediate threats. This approach prioritizes safety, legal obligations, and the preservation of evidence, aligning with the principles of lawful and ethical policing as outlined in the Durham Regional Police Service's operational guidelines and the Police Services Act of Ontario, which mandates officers to preserve the peace, prevent offenses, and aid in their apprehension. Incorrect approaches analysis. Approaching the individual aggressively and demanding immediate answers without first assessing the scene or rendering aid could escalate the situation unnecessarily and potentially violate the individual's rights if they are a victim or a witness in distress. Failing to secure the scene and preserve evidence before engaging with the individual risks contamination or loss of crucial information that could be vital to the investigation. Ignoring the individual's behavior and proceeding directly to questioning without assessing for immediate threats could place the officer and others at undue risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured approach to dynamic situations. This involves a rapid situational assessment, prioritizing immediate safety and welfare, rendering aid, followed by scene security and evidence preservation. Only then should direct engagement with individuals occur, with a clear understanding of their role, victim, witness, suspect, and any potential risks. This systematic process ensures that legal and ethical obligations are met while maximizing investigative effectiveness and officer safety. Question 9. The evaluation methodology shows that when faced with a potential public safety threat in Durham, North Carolina, involving a credible but unconfirmed report of suspicious activity at a public gathering, what is the most appropriate initial risk assessment and response strategy? Option A. Rely on the initial informant statement as the primary basis for action and proceed with a direct, assertive intervention at the reported location. Option B. Delay any significant response until all aspects of the report are fully corroborated by multiple independent sources to avoid unnecessary disruption. Option C. Focus all available resources on a highly visible, immediate perimeter lockdown of the entire area to prevent any potential movement. Option D. Immediately deploy a tactical team to investigate the specific location of the reported activity, while simultaneously initiating discrete intelligence gathering to assess the broader context and potential for escalation. The correct answer is D. Immediately deploy a tactical team to investigate the specific location of the reported activity, while simultaneously initiating discrete intelligence gathering to assess the broader context and potential for escalation. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that effective risk assessment within the Durham Police Department requires a nuanced understanding of both immediate threats and potential long-term consequences, balanced against resource allocation and public safety mandates. This scenario is professionally challenging because it forces a decision under pressure, where incomplete information and competing priorities must be weighed. The need to act decisively while adhering to departmental policy and ethical considerations is paramount. The best approach involves a systematic, evidence-based assessment that prioritizes immediate threats to life and public safety, while simultaneously initiating a broader intelligence gathering process to understand the full scope of the risk. This aligns with the Durham Police Department's operational guidelines, which emphasize a tiered response based on threat level and the importance of proactive intelligence gathering to inform future actions and resource deployment. This method ensures that immediate dangers are addressed without compromising the department's ability to manage evolving situations and prevent future incidents. An approach that focuses solely on the most visible or immediate threat, without considering the potential for escalation or the underlying causes, is insufficient. This fails to meet the departmental requirement for comprehensive risk analysis and can lead to reactive policing rather than strategic intervention. Similarly, an approach that delays action due to a lack of complete information, when there is a clear and present danger, violates the ethical imperative to protect life and public safety. This demonstrates a failure to exercise appropriate judgment in a critical situation. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal bias rather than established intelligence protocols is professionally unacceptable and undermines the integrity of the risk assessment process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core problem and its immediate impact. This should be followed by an assessment of available information, considering its reliability and completeness. Next, potential courses of action should be evaluated against departmental policies, legal frameworks, and ethical principles, prioritizing those that mitigate the greatest risk to public safety. Continuous monitoring and re-evaluation of the situation are crucial, allowing for adjustments to the response as new information emerges. Question 10. The audit findings indicate that the Durham Police Department requires new patrol vehicles to maintain operational readiness. The estimated upfront cost for the preferred model is $40,000 per vehicle, with an expected lifespan of 8 years. Annual maintenance and fuel costs are projected at $3,000 per vehicle. Department anticipates a 5% annual increase in maintenance and fuel costs due to inflation. If the department purchases 10 vehicles and the discount rate for future cash flows is 6%, what is the net present value, NPV, of the total expenditure over the 8-year period, assuming the initial purchase occurs at the beginning of year 1? Option A. A calculated NPV of approximately $350,000. Option B. A calculated NPV of approximately $420,500. Option C. A calculated NPV of approximately $375,000. Option D. A calculated NPV of approximately $398,750. The correct answer is D. A calculated NPV of approximately $398,750. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the Durham Police Department to balance the immediate need for resources against the long-term implications of financial risk and potential overspending. The pressure to acquire necessary equipment quickly can lead to decisions that bypass thorough risk assessment, potentially jeopardizing departmental finances and operational efficiency. Careful judgment is required to ensure that procurement decisions are both timely and fiscally responsible, adhering to all relevant North Carolina state procurement laws and departmental financial policies. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive risk assessment that quantifies the potential financial impact of the equipment acquisition. This includes calculating the total cost of ownership, factoring in maintenance, training, and potential obsolescence, and comparing this to the projected benefits and the department's current budget. A key element is the calculation of the return on investment, ROI, and the net present value, NPV, of the expenditure, ensuring the acquisition aligns with the department's financial sustainability. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the fiscal responsibility mandated by North Carolina general statutes, particularly those governing public purchasing and budgeting, which require prudent management of taxpayer funds. It also aligns with ethical principles of good stewardship and accountability. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the purchase based solely on the lowest upfront cost, without considering the total cost of ownership or potential long-term financial risks. This fails to comply with North Carolina's procurement laws that emphasize value for money, not just the initial price. It also ignores the ethical obligation to manage public funds responsibly, potentially leading to budget shortfalls or the need for future, more costly, repairs or replacements. Another incorrect approach is to delay the purchase indefinitely due to perceived, but unquantified, financial risks without conducting a proper risk assessment. This can lead to operational deficiencies and a failure to meet departmental objectives, which is also a form of fiscal irresponsibility if the lack of equipment leads to greater costs or reduced effectiveness in the long run. This approach neglects the duty to provide necessary resources for effective policing. A further incorrect approach is to rely on anecdotal evidence or informal opinions regarding the equipment's reliability and cost-effectiveness, rather than conducting a data-driven risk assessment. This introduces subjective bias and increases the likelihood of making a poor financial decision, violating the principle of evidence-based decision-making and potentially misallocating limited public resources. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem and objectives. This is followed by identifying all potential risks and benefits, quantifying them where possible, and evaluating them against established criteria, e.g., financial sustainability, operational effectiveness, legal compliance. The framework should include a thorough review of relevant North Carolina statutes and departmental policies, followed by the selection of the option that best balances immediate needs with long-term fiscal health and ethical obligations. A formal risk assessment, including financial modeling, is a critical component of this process. Question 11. Quality control measures reveal that during a recent investigation in Durham, North Carolina, officers responded to a report of a potential ongoing assault. Upon arrival, they observed signs of a struggle but no immediate victim or assailant. An officer then entered a nearby residence without a warrant or explicit consent, believing a victim might be inside and in danger, which approach best reflects the appropriate risk assessment and procedural adherence for Durham Police Department officers in such a situation. Option A. Immediately enter the residence without a warrant, prioritizing the potential rescue of a victim over the need for legal authorization, assuming the urgency of the situation overrides standard procedures. Option B. Detain any individuals found near the residence and question them extensively about the incident, using the information gathered to justify a subsequent entry if deemed necessary, even if it means delaying immediate access. Option C. Conduct a thorough external search of the property and surrounding area for further evidence or witnesses before considering any entry, even if there is a strong suspicion of immediate danger inside. Option D. Attempt to secure consent from any occupants of the residence to enter, and if consent is refused or unavailable, articulate specific exigent circumstances that justify a warrantless entry based on probable cause to prevent imminent harm or destruction of evidence. The correct answer is D. Attempt to secure consent from any occupants of the residence to enter, and if consent is refused or unavailable, articulate specific exigent circumstances that justify a warrantless entry based on probable cause to prevent imminent harm or destruction of evidence. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in law enforcement where an officer must balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights and ensure the integrity of evidence. The Durham Police Department operates under the laws of North Carolina and federal constitutional principles, particularly the Fourth Amendment regarding searches and seizures. The challenge lies in obtaining crucial information that could prevent further harm or apprehend a suspect without violating established legal procedures, which could lead to the suppression of evidence and undermine the investigation. The best approach involves a systematic and legally sound method of gathering information that respects individual liberties. This includes clearly identifying the nature of the threat, assessing the urgency, and then employing lawful means to obtain consent or, if exigent circumstances exist, proceeding with a search based on probable cause. Documenting all actions and justifications meticulously is paramount. This approach aligns with North Carolina general statutes and established case law concerning searches, seizures, and the admissibility of evidence. It prioritizes due process and the protection of constitutional rights, which are fundamental to maintaining public trust and ensuring justice. An approach that relies solely on perceived urgency without establishing probable cause or attempting to obtain consent is legally flawed. It risks violating the Fourth Amendment by conducting an unreasonable search or seizure. Such an action could lead to the exclusion of any evidence obtained, hindering the investigation and potentially allowing a perpetrator to evade justice. Furthermore, it erodes public confidence in the police department by demonstrating a disregard for established legal protections. Another unacceptable approach involves coercing or misleading individuals into providing information or consent. This undermines the voluntariness of any statement or consent, rendering it inadmissible in court. It also violates ethical principles of honesty and fairness, which are core to the professional conduct of law enforcement officers. Such tactics can lead to wrongful accusations and damage the reputation of the Durham Police Department. Finally, an approach that delays necessary action due to an overly rigid adherence to protocol, even when immediate intervention is clearly warranted and legally permissible under exigent circumstances, could also be problematic. While caution is necessary, an action when there is a clear and present danger that could be averted through lawful means is also a failure of duty. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear assessment of the situation, including the nature of the threat and the potential for harm. This assessment should then be used to determine the legal parameters for action. If consent can be obtained voluntarily and knowingly, that is the preferred route. If probable cause exists and exigent circumstances are present, e.g., imminent danger to life, destruction of evidence, a lawful search or seizure may be justified. In all cases, thorough documentation of observations, actions, and justifications is critical for accountability and legal defensibility. Question 12. The control framework reveals a potential security lapse concerning sensitive informant data within the Durham Police Department. An officer has identified a need to access this data for an urgent investigation, but is concerned about the current data handling protocols. Which of the following represents the most prudent and ethically sound course of action? Option A. Proceed with accessing the data immediately to support the urgent investigation, assuming current protocols are sufficient unless a breach is confirmed. Option B. Request an immediate, informal review of the data handling protocols by a colleague, and if they deem it acceptable, proceed with accessing the data. Option C. Inform the informant that their concerns are noted but proceed with accessing the data due to the urgency of the investigation, promising to review protocols later. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive risk assessment of the data handling protocols. Consult with the informant, where appropriate and safe to do so, regarding their concerns, and implement enhanced security measures before accessing the data. The correct answer is D. Initiate a comprehensive risk assessment of the data handling protocols. Consult with the informant, where appropriate and safe to do so, regarding their concerns, and implement enhanced security measures before accessing the data. Explanation. The control framework reveals a potential vulnerability in the Durham Police Department's handling of sensitive informant data. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational intelligence with the long-term imperative of maintaining informant trust and adhering to strict data protection regulations. A lapse in judgment could compromise ongoing investigations, endanger informants, and lead to severe legal and ethical repercussions for the department. The best approach involves a multi-layered risk assessment that prioritizes data security and informant welfare. This entails a thorough review of existing protocols for handling sensitive information, identifying specific threats to data integrity, e.g., unauthorized access, accidental disclosure, and evaluating the potential impact of such breaches. Crucially, this assessment must include a direct consultation with the informant, where feasible and appropriate, to understand their specific concerns and to reinforce the department's commitment to their safety and confidentiality. This proactive and collaborative method ensures that operational needs are met without compromising the ethical and legal obligations to protect informant identities and information, aligning with the principles of lawful and ethical policing. An approach that focuses solely on the immediate operational benefit without a comprehensive risk assessment is professionally unacceptable. This would involve disregarding the potential for data breaches or the impact on informant trust, thereby failing to uphold the department's duty of care and potentially violating data protection laws. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the informant's concerns without a thorough investigation into the perceived vulnerabilities. This demonstrates a lack of respect for the informant's safety and a failure to engage in due diligence, which can erode trust and discourage future cooperation. Finally, an approach that relies on outdated or incomplete risk assessment tools, without considering the evolving nature of digital threats and informant protection best practices, is also professionally deficient. This can lead to a false sense of security and leave the department exposed to significant risks. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying the core issue, gathering all relevant information, including legal, ethical, and operational considerations, assessing the risks and potential consequences of each course of action, consulting relevant policies and legal frameworks, and finally, selecting the option that best upholds both operational effectiveness and ethical/legal compliance. Question 13. Analysis of a situation in Durham, North Carolina, where a police officer is investigating a robbery and believes an individual may have witnessed the crime. The officer knows this individual is also currently a suspect in an unrelated, ongoing investigation by a different unit. What is the most appropriate course of action for the investigating officer to take when approaching this individual for questioning? Option A. Inform the individual of their right to remain silent and their right to legal counsel before commencing any questioning, acknowledging their potential dual status. Option B. Delay informing the individual of their rights until after initial questions have been asked and some preliminary information has been gathered. Option C. Suggest to the individual that cooperating with the robbery investigation might positively influence the outcome of their unrelated legal matter. Option D. Proceed with questioning the individual as a witness, assuming their involvement in the robbery is purely observational, and address their other legal matter separately later. The correct answer is A. Inform the individual of their right to remain silent and their right to legal counsel before commencing any questioning, acknowledging their potential dual status. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Durham Police Department officer due to the inherent tension between the need to gather information for an ongoing investigation and the legal and ethical obligations to respect an individual's right to privacy and to avoid coercion. The officer must exercise sound judgment to ensure that any information obtained is admissible and ethically sourced, without compromising the integrity of the investigation or violating civil liberties. The presence of a potential witness who is also a suspect in a separate, unrelated matter adds a layer of complexity, requiring careful consideration of how their rights might be impacted. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly informing the individual of their rights, including the right to remain silent and the right to legal counsel, before any questioning begins, especially given their status as a potential suspect in another matter. This aligns with the principles of due process and the protection against self-incrimination enshrined in law. Specifically, in Durham, this would involve adherence to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, PACE, Codes of Practice, particularly Code C, which governs the detention, treatment, and questioning of persons by police officers. Informing the individual of their rights ensures that any statement made is voluntary and admissible in court, upholding ethical standards of fairness and transparency. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with questioning without informing the individual of their rights, under the assumption that they are merely a witness. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It violates PACE Code C, which mandates cautioning suspects and informing them of their rights. Failing to do so can render any subsequent statements inadmissible and could lead to disciplinary action and damage to the department's reputation. Another incorrect approach is to imply that cooperation with the current investigation will somehow benefit them in their unrelated legal matter. This constitutes an improper inducement or threat, which is a clear violation of PACE and fundamental ethical principles. It undermines the voluntariness of any statement and could lead to the evidence being excluded. A third incorrect approach is to delay informing the individual of their rights until after initial questioning has yielded some information. This is also a regulatory failure, as the caution should be administered as soon as there is suspicion that the person may have committed an offense, or when they are being questioned about an offense. Delaying the caution can be seen as an attempt to circumvent legal protections and can compromise the integrity of the evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves a proactive assessment of an individual's status, witness, suspect, or both, and the immediate application of relevant legal safeguards, such as the PACE caution. When in doubt about an individual's status or the implications of questioning, seeking advice from a supervisor or legal counsel is paramount. The principle of innocent until proven guilty and the right to a fair trial must guide all investigative actions. Question 14. The review process indicates a potential oversight in evidence handling during a recent patrol in the Durham region. A uniformed officer, while on foot patrol, discovered a small, unmarked electronic device on a public sidewalk. The officer, believing it to be a discarded personal item with no immediate investigative significance, did not log it at the scene. Instead, the officer placed it in their personal duty bag with the intention of logging it later if it seemed relevant. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer in this situation, considering Durham Regional Police Service general orders? Option A. Discuss the found item with colleagues informally to gauge their opinion on its significance before initiating any formal process. Option B. Place the item in a personal locker for later logging once the officer has more time to assess its potential relevance. Option C. Immediately secure the found item and initiate the formal evidence logging procedure as outlined in DRPS General Order 3. 1. Option D. Discard the item if it appears to be of no immediate investigative value to avoid unnecessary paperwork. The correct answer is C. Immediately secure the found item and initiate the formal evidence logging procedure as outlined in DRPS General Order 3. 1. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential lapse in adherence to the Durham Regional Police Services, DRPS, general orders concerning the proper handling and documentation of evidence. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the urgency of an ongoing investigation with the absolute requirement for meticulous evidence management to maintain the integrity of the case and uphold public trust. Failure to follow established protocols can lead to evidence being inadmissible in court, jeopardizing prosecutions and undermining the justice system. The best approach involves immediately securing the found item and initiating the formal evidence logging procedure as outlined in DRPS General Order 3. 1. This procedure mandates that all found property, regardless of perceived value or relevance, must be logged, photographed, and stored securely according to departmental policy. This ensures a clear chain of custody and prevents any ambiguity or suspicion of tampering. Adhering to this protocol is ethically imperative, as it upholds the principles of fairness and due process, and legally required by the DRPS General Orders, which are designed to ensure the admissibility of evidence in court proceedings. An approach that involves placing the item in a personal locker for later logging is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses the established chain of custody, creating a significant risk of evidence contamination or loss. It also violates DRPS General Order 3. 1. By failing to log the item immediately upon discovery, which could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal or manipulate evidence, leading to severe ethical and legal repercussions. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to discard the item if it appears to be of no immediate investigative value. This is a direct contravention of DRPS General Order 3. 1. Which requires all found items to be logged. Discarding potential evidence, even if seemingly insignificant at the time, is a serious ethical breach and can have dire consequences for an investigation, as seemingly minor items can later prove crucial. Finally, an approach that involves discussing the found item with colleagues informally, without initiating the formal logging process, is also professionally unsound. While collegial discussion is important, it does not substitute for the required documentation. This informal approach fails to establish a proper chain of custody and leaves the evidence vulnerable to the same risks of contamination or loss as placing it in a locker. It also neglects the explicit requirements of DRPS General Order 3. 1. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established policies and procedures above all else when dealing with evidence. This involves a clear understanding of departmental general orders, a commitment to meticulous documentation, and a proactive approach to ensuring the integrity of the investigative process. When in doubt, always err on the side of caution and follow the prescribed protocols. Question 15. Performance analysis shows that officers in Durham, North Carolina, sometimes engage with the public in situations that do not immediately result in an arrest or citation. Following a recent community feedback session highlighting concerns about transparency, what is the most appropriate immediate action for an officer to take after concluding a brief, informal interaction with a citizen regarding a potential minor disturbance, where no enforcement action was taken? Option A. Wait to file any report until a supervisor requests information about the specific interaction. Option B. Make a verbal report to a supervisor and consider the matter closed unless further issues arise. Option C. Immediately initiate a formal incident report detailing the interaction, observations, and any advice or information provided to the citizen. Option D. Assume the interaction is too minor to warrant any formal documentation and proceed to the next call. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a formal incident report detailing the interaction, observations, and any advice or information provided to the citizen. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in law enforcement where departmental policy, public perception, and the need for transparency intersect. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to address a public safety concern with the procedural requirements for documenting and reporting such incidents, especially when the initial response might have been informal or based on limited information. The pressure to act quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts that compromise thoroughness and accountability, which are critical for maintaining public trust and ensuring due process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately initiating a formal incident report, even if the initial interaction was brief or informal. This approach ensures that all actions taken by officers are documented, providing a clear record for internal review, potential legal proceedings, and public accountability. This aligns with the Durham Police Department's commitment to transparency and adherence to established protocols for incident management and reporting, which are designed to capture all relevant details, regardless of the perceived severity of the initial event. This proactive documentation safeguards against future misunderstandings and ensures that the department can respond accurately to any inquiries. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on an informal verbal report to a supervisor without creating a written record. This fails to establish a formal, auditable trail of the incident and the department's response. It bypasses established departmental procedures for incident documentation, potentially leading to a lack of accountability and making it impossible to retrieve accurate information if the incident is later questioned or requires further investigation. This also undermines the principle of transparency by not creating a record accessible for oversight. Another incorrect approach is to assume the incident is minor and requires no formal documentation because no arrest was made or no immediate charges were filed. This overlooks the fact that even brief interactions can have significant implications, such as establishing a pattern of behavior or providing context for future events. Departmental policy typically mandates documentation for all public interactions that involve the exercise of police authority, regardless of the immediate outcome. Failing to document such interactions can lead to gaps in departmental records and a lack of understanding of the scope of police activity within the community. A third incorrect approach is to delay the formal report until further information is gathered, potentially days later. This introduces the risk of memory degradation and the loss of crucial details. Prompt reporting is essential for accuracy and completeness. Delays can also be perceived as an attempt to obscure or downplay the incident, eroding public trust. The procedural integrity of incident reporting relies on timely and accurate data entry. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a document first, investigate further mindset when encountering situations that involve the exercise of police authority. This means prioritizing the creation of a formal record as soon as possible, even if the initial details are incomplete. This record serves as the foundation for any subsequent investigation or follow-up. Professionals should consult departmental policy and procedural manuals regularly to ensure their actions align with established protocols for incident reporting and documentation. When in doubt, erring on the side of thorough documentation is always the safer and more ethical choice. Question 16. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a data breach involving sensitive citizen information due to an outdated IT system at the Durham Police Department. Considering the requirements of the UK's Data Protection Act 2018, which of the following actions represents the most responsible and compliant response? Option A. Postpone any significant IT system upgrades until the next budget cycle, citing current financial constraints as a reason for inaction. Option B. Immediately commit to a complete replacement of the entire IT infrastructure without a detailed assessment of current system weaknesses. Option C. Rely on existing security protocols, assuming they are sufficient to prevent a breach despite the risk matrix indicating otherwise. Option D. Initiate a detailed audit of the IT system to pinpoint specific vulnerabilities and develop a phased remediation plan, prioritizing the highest risk areas for immediate attention. Correct answer is D. Initiate a detailed audit of the IT system to pinpoint specific vulnerabilities and develop a phased remediation plan, prioritizing the highest risk areas for immediate attention. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a data breach involving sensitive citizen information due to an outdated IT system at the Durham Police Department. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term security and compliance obligations under the UK's Data Protection Act 2018, DPA 2018, and the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which is directly incorporated into UK law. The department must act decisively to mitigate risk without causing undue disruption or incurring excessive, unbudgeted costs. The best approach involves a proactive, risk-based strategy that prioritizes the most critical vulnerabilities. This means immediately initiating a comprehensive audit of the IT system to identify specific weaknesses and developing a phased plan for remediation, starting with the highest risk areas. This aligns with the DPA 2018 principles of data protection by design and by default, requiring appropriate technical and organizational measures to be implemented to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk. It also reflects the ICO's guidance on data security, which emphasizes a proportionate and risk-based approach to data protection. An incorrect approach would be to delay action until a breach occurs. This is a failure to meet the DPA 2018 requirement for ongoing data security and risk management. It also contravenes the principle of accountability, which mandates that the department must be able to demonstrate compliance. Another incorrect approach is to immediately commit to a complete system overhaul without a thorough assessment. This could lead to significant, potentially unnecessary expenditure and operational disruption, failing the principle of proportionality and potentially violating the DPA 2018 requirement for data processing to be adequate, relevant, and not excessive. Finally, ignoring the risk matrix entirely due to budget constraints is a direct abdication of responsibility under the DPA 2018 and ICO guidance, exposing the department and citizens to unacceptable risk. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the identified risks and their potential impact. This should be followed by an assessment of available resources and regulatory obligations. The process involves evaluating potential solutions against these factors, prioritizing actions based on risk reduction and compliance, and developing a clear implementation plan with defined responsibilities and timelines. Continuous monitoring and review are essential to adapt to evolving threats and ensure ongoing compliance. Question 17. Investigation of a complex fraud scheme in Durham region has led to the seizure of financial records under a production order. A detective from a neighboring police service contacts the lead investigator, requesting access to this information to assist their own ongoing investigation into a related but separate matter. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Durham Regional Police Service investigator? Option A. Obtain explicit judicial authorization, such as a court order or warrant, before disclosing any information to the neighboring police service. Option B. Disclose the information to the neighboring police service based on a verbal request from a fellow officer from a reputable agency. Option C. Share the information with the neighboring police service without any documentation or record of the disclosure. Option D. Provide the information to the neighboring police service, under the assumption that information sharing is generally encouraged between police services. The correct answer is A. Obtain explicit judicial authorization, such as a court order or warrant, before disclosing any information to the neighboring police service. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Durham Regional Police Service officers due to the sensitive nature of information obtained during an investigation and the potential for its misuse. Balancing the need for thorough investigation with the protection of individual privacy and adherence to legal disclosure requirements is paramount. The challenge lies in navigating the complexities of information sharing, ensuring it is lawful, ethical, and serves a legitimate investigative purpose without compromising ongoing investigations or individual rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining explicit judicial authorization, such as a court order or warrant, before disclosing any information obtained under the authority of a production order to external agencies. This approach is correct because it strictly adheres to the principles of lawful access and privacy protection enshrined in Canadian federal legislation, specifically the Criminal Code of Canada and the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPEDA, which govern the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information. Judicial oversight ensures that disclosure is necessary, proportionate, and respects the rights of individuals whose information is being accessed. It provides a legal safeguard against unauthorized or premature dissemination of sensitive investigative data. Incorrect approaches analysis. Disclosing the information to the neighboring police service based solely on a verbal request from a fellow officer, even if they are from a reputable agency, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the legal threshold for disclosure and bypasses necessary authorization protocols. It risks violating privacy laws and potentially jeopardizing the integrity of both investigations by prematurely revealing sensitive details. Sharing the information with the neighboring police service without any documentation or record of the disclosure is also professionally unacceptable. This lack of a documented trail makes it impossible to track the information, verify its lawful dissemination, or hold individuals accountable for its use. It undermines transparency and accountability, which are fundamental to policing ethics and legal compliance. Providing the information to the neighboring police service under the assumption that information sharing is generally encouraged between police services is a dangerous oversimplification. While cooperation is vital, it must always be conducted within strict legal and ethical boundaries. This assumption ignores the specific legal requirements for disclosure, particularly when information is obtained under a production order which carries specific conditions for its use and dissemination. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and investigative integrity. This involves 1. Identifying the legal basis for obtaining the information, e.g., production order. 2. Understanding the specific conditions and limitations attached to that legal authority regarding disclosure. 3. Consulting relevant departmental policies and procedures for information sharing. 4. Seeking legal advice or judicial authorization when in doubt or when disclosure is contemplated outside of standard protocols. 5. Documenting all actions and decisions meticulously. Question 18. Comparative studies suggest that the implementation of new evidence handling protocols can significantly impact case outcomes. In Durham, England, a police officer lawfully searches a property and discovers a small, unmarked electronic device in a desk drawer. The officer recognizes the potential significance of the device, but is concerned about the time it might take to properly document and secure it according to the force's procedures. Which of the following actions best upholds the principles of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 and its associated codes of practice in England and Wales? Option A. Seize the device and make a mental note of its location and appearance, intending to document it fully once other aspects of the search are completed. Option B. Leave the device at the scene, assuming its significance can be assessed later if the investigation progresses. Option C. Discuss the potential significance of the device with the suspect at the scene to gauge their reaction before securing it. Option D. Immediately secure the device, meticulously document its location and discovery circumstances, and then follow the force's established protocols for packaging and evidence logging. The correct answer is D. Immediately secure the device, meticulously document its location and discovery circumstances, and then follow the force's established protocols for packaging and evidence logging. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Durham Police Department officer regarding the proper handling of evidence discovered during a lawful search. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to secure potential evidence with the strict procedural requirements mandated by the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 PACE and associated codes of practice in England and Wales. Failure to adhere to these procedures can lead to the exclusion of vital evidence in court, jeopardizing the prosecution and undermining public trust in the police. The officer must exercise sound judgment to ensure that the integrity of the investigation is maintained while respecting the rights of individuals and the legal framework governing evidence collection. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting the discovery and seizure of the item, ensuring it is handled in accordance with the force's established evidence management protocols. This includes immediate recording of the item's location, description, and the circumstances of its discovery, followed by secure packaging and labeling as per PACE Code of Practice B. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the evidential requirements of PACE, which emphasizes the importance of maintaining a clear and unbroken chain of custody and ensuring that evidence is collected in a manner that preserves its integrity and admissibility in court. Adherence to these protocols is a fundamental ethical and legal obligation for law enforcement officers in England and Wales. Incorrect approach is analysis. Seizing the item without immediate, detailed documentation and proper packaging, and instead relying on a later, less precise recollection, constitutes a significant regulatory failure. This approach risks compromising the chain of custody and raises doubts about the item's original condition and context, potentially rendering it inadmissible under PACE. Another incorrect approach involves discussing the potential significance of the item with the suspect at the scene before it has been properly secured and documented. This could be construed as an attempt to elicit a confession or influence the suspect's statement without proper legal safeguards, potentially violating PACE Code of Conduct for interviews and investigations. Finally, Assuming the item is insignificant and leaving it at the scene without any record or securement is a gross dereliction of duty and a clear breach of evidential procedures, undermining the investigative process and potentially allowing crucial evidence to be lost or tampered with. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic approach to evidence handling. This involves understanding and consistently applying the relevant legal framework, in this case, PACE and its codes of practice. When encountering potential evidence, the immediate steps should be: 1. Secure the immediate area. 2. Document the discovery meticulously. What, where, when, who. 3. Properly package and label the item according to established protocols. 4. Maintain a clear chain of custody throughout. Any deviation from these steps should be carefully considered against the legal and ethical implications, prioritizing the integrity of the investigation and the admissibility of evidence. Question 19. The investigation demonstrates that officers in Durham, North Carolina, have probable cause to believe a suspect involved in a recent violent assault is currently inside their private residence. The suspect is known to be armed and has a history of resisting arrest. Officers have secured the perimeter of the property. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the Durham Police Department officers to take next? Option A. Immediately seek a search warrant from a judicial officer based on the established probable cause. Option B. Attempt to contact the suspect by phone or other means to negotiate their surrender before seeking any judicial authorization. Option C. Wait for additional specialized units to arrive, even if it means a significant delay, before taking any action to enter the residence. Option D. Enter the residence without a warrant to apprehend the suspect, citing the violent nature of the crime and the suspect's history. The correct answer is A. Immediately seek a search warrant from a judicial officer based on the established probable cause. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a common challenge faced by law enforcement in Durham, North Carolina, balancing the need for swift action with the imperative to uphold constitutional rights and departmental policy. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to make rapid decisions under pressure, where a misstep can lead to compromised evidence, legal repercussions, and a breach of public trust. The urgency of apprehending a suspect involved in a violent crime must be weighed against the strictures of probable cause and the protection against unreasonable searches and seizures as guaranteed by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and North Carolina law. The correct approach involves officers securing the scene and immediately seeking a warrant based on the established probable cause. This method is correct because it adheres strictly to constitutional mandates and Durham Police Department policy regarding searches of private residences. By obtaining a warrant, officers ensure that any subsequent search is judicially authorized, limiting the scope of the intrusion and safeguarding the suspect's rights. This process respects the sanctity of the home and prevents arbitrary governmental intrusion, a cornerstone of American jurisprudence. It also ensures that any evidence obtained is more likely to be admissible in court, thereby advancing the cause of justice. An incorrect approach would be to enter the residence without a warrant to apprehend the suspect, even with probable cause. This action directly violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against warrantless searches of a home, absent exigent circumstances. While the suspect is involved in a violent crime, the mere fact of their involvement does not automatically create exigent circumstances that would justify a warrantless entry into their home for apprehension. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the investigation significantly to gather more evidence, potentially allowing the suspect to escape or destroy crucial evidence. This would be a failure to act decisively when probable cause exists, and a warrant could be reasonably obtained. Finally, relying solely on the victim's statement without corroborating evidence to establish probable cause for a warrant would also be an insufficient and potentially flawed approach, as it might not meet the legal threshold for judicial authorization. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional compliance and departmental policy. This involves a clear assessment of whether probable cause exists, followed by an evaluation of potential exigent circumstances. If probable cause is established and no exigent circumstances are present, the immediate and primary course of action should be to secure the scene and diligently pursue a search warrant. This systematic approach ensures that actions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and ultimately contribute to the effective and just administration of law enforcement in Durham. Question 20. Assessment of the Durham Police Department's upcoming fiscal year budget request requires a precise calculation of projected operational costs. Given historical data showing an average of 15,000 calls for service per quarter, with an average cost of $120 per call in the previous fiscal year, and an anticipated 3% increase in call volume and a 4% inflation rate for operational expenses, what is the projected total operational cost for the upcoming fiscal year, assuming these factors are the primary drivers of the budget? Option A, $2,448,000. Option B, $2,496,000. Option C, $2,547,120. Option D, $2,500,000. The correct answer is C, $2,547,120. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in law enforcement budgeting and resource allocation, particularly within a specific jurisdiction like the Durham Police Department. The core challenge lies in accurately forecasting operational needs and translating them into a justifiable budget request that balances efficiency with effectiveness, while adhering to provincial financial management principles. Miscalculations or flawed assumptions can lead to underfunding, impacting service delivery, or overspending, leading to accountability issues. The need for precise mathematical application in projecting costs and evaluating efficiency metrics is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a rigorous, data-driven methodology that directly links projected operational demands to resource requirements, utilizing established cost-per-unit metrics and accounting for inflation. This approach, as outlined in Option A, begins with a detailed analysis of historical incident data, e.g., calls for service, arrest rates, traffic stops, and crime trends specific to Durham. These are then translated into projected operational hours and personnel needs. Crucially, it incorporates a realistic inflation factor for salaries, equipment, and operational expenses, ensuring the budget request maintains purchasing power. The calculation of a projected cost per incident or per service unit, derived from these detailed projections, provides a quantifiable measure of efficiency and a robust basis for the budget request. This aligns with the principles of responsible financial management and accountability expected of public institutions in Ontario, which emphasize evidence-based decision-making and prudent use of taxpayer funds. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that relies solely on a percentage increase over the previous year's budget, Option B, is flawed because it fails to account for changing operational demands, inflation rates, or specific new initiatives. A simple percentage increase is a heuristic that can lead to either underfunding or overspending, as it lacks a direct link to actual service needs. This approach is ethically questionable as it does not demonstrate due diligence in resource allocation. An approach that prioritizes the acquisition of new, high-profile equipment without a clear justification based on operational necessity or a cost-benefit analysis, Option C, is problematic. While technological advancement is important, it must be driven by demonstrable needs and a clear return on investment in terms of improved service delivery or efficiency. Without this, it represents a misallocation of resources and a failure to adhere to principles of fiscal responsibility. An approach that bases the budget request on the budgets of neighboring police departments, Option D, is also inadequate. While interdepartmental comparisons can offer some context, each jurisdiction has unique demographic profiles, crime rates, and operational challenges. A direct copy or simple averaging ignores these specificities and does not demonstrate an understanding of Durham's particular needs. This can lead to a budget that is either insufficient or unnecessarily inflated, failing to meet the specific requirements of the Durham Police Department. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a systematic, analytical approach to budget forecasting. This involves 1. Understanding the specific operational context and historical data of their jurisdiction. 2. Identifying key performance indicators and cost drivers. 3. Applying appropriate mathematical and statistical methods to project future needs and costs, including inflation. 4. Conducting thorough cost-benefit analyses for any proposed new expenditures. 5. Ensuring transparency and accountability in the budget request process by clearly articulating the rationale behind each component. This structured decision-making process ensures that resources are allocated effectively and ethically, in accordance with regulatory requirements and public trust.